Welcome to Razor's Edge, the podcast where startup founders take us behind the curtain of their most critical fundraising moments. I'm your host, Ben Elowitz. In this episode, I sit down with Yifan Zhang, a multi-time founder who knows all too well how raising capital can be make or break for a startup. Yifan is a managing director at AI2, a top startup incubator in the AI space. But she got to her role as an investor by first being a two-time startup CEO. Yifan raised millions for her companies. First, Gympact, a viral fitness app that she launched out of Techstars, and then Loftium, a proptech startup that hybridized Airbnb with homeownership, which raised over $100 million, including $28 million in VC over 3 rounds. In our conversation, she tells the wild story of losing 90% of Loftium's revenue in just 4 days when COVID struck and the Airbnb business cratered. Not only did she bring the company back from the brink, but she then raised more capital and ultimately got acquired. It's a candid conversation. You'll hear Yifan share why she dreads fundraising, even though she's exceptional at it, how you need to own your own expertise when you're in the room with VCs, and why she doesn't see failure as something to avoid, but as something to talk about. Yifan also shares her fundraising playbook, from running a tight fundraising sprint to building a database of every investor's style. For any startup founder who needs to raise capital, there's gold in this conversation. So grab your headphones and welcome to Razor's Edge. So why don't I put you on the spot and have you introduce yourself the way you would introduce yourself in an investment pitch?
I feel like I'm a little out of practice at this point. I'm Yifan Zhang. I am a two-time former founder now. Went to Harvard undergrad, started my first company right after college graduation. It was one of the top mobile fitness apps in the first wave called Gympact. Then I started a second startup called Loftium that was in the affordable housing proptech space. That company was acquired by Fly Homes here in Seattle. And now I'm a managing director of the AI2 incubator, which is, born from the Allen Institute for AI, also in Seattle.
Awesome. I thought it would be fun to start with a little lightning round.
Yeah.
So if you had to describe your leadership style in one word, what would it be?
I really like that. The first word that came to mind was collaborative.
Awesome. Awesome. Do you have a favorite book or podcast that you feel like every entrepreneur should check out?
Oh my gosh. I just read this book called The Magic Box Paradigm on Startup Acquisitions. Every founder that I recommend it to, they read it and they're like, I wish I read this way earlier. So that's the one.
Wow, I'm going to have to pick that up. That's awesome. If you could collaborate with any great founder, who would it be?
Oh man, there's so many. I don't know. Okay, first name that popped to mind was Reid Hoffman. I have to say that
Oh,
would be
yeah.
just a dream come true. I think the way that he thinks strategically about every decision, company creation, so much to be able to learn from.
Totally. Amazing. Would you say, is fundraising a relationship or a transaction?
I was thinking it's a process. I'm definitely much more of a transaction process fundraising type versus the relationship building fundraising type, I have to admit.
Right. What's your biggest green flag for an investor?
If I do cold reference checks with a founder who's struggled, not straight shot to success, but ups and downs, and I hear that the investor has been helpful, supportive in the ups and the downs.
Yeah. Kind of seeing them stick it through.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. And last lightning question. Do you love fundraising or do you dread it?
Probably dread it, but there is a perverse joy, I guess, when you execute really well and you know that you have done the best possible process for your raise, no matter how difficult it is, right? Sometimes your company is doing super well and it's easy anyways, but even in the moments where it's really hard and you know that you got the best investor and the best terms possible, like there's a joy in that. But mostly I dread
Yeah.
it.
And I think the vast majority of entrepreneurs dreads it. A lot of times when I work with people, we have to figure out, okay, how do we find joy in this process? So you are way, way, way ahead and in the minority,
Oh,
which
in
is
the middle
awesome.
of it, it feels like getting punched in the face repeatedly and just getting back up.
I'd love to kind of talk about your entrepreneurial journey. You founded your first startup, Gympact, right out of undergrad at Harvard. Can we talk about your transformation from kind of an excited undergrad into an entrepreneur meeting with VCs and asking for capital?
Yes, absolutely. So I had some support. I went through the Techstars program in Boston with Gympact, and I think that was very helpful for me. As an undergrad, you're a student, right? So you're learning, you're asking all these questions, you're kind of like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you're always like looking to learn. And I really had to learn how to turn like just like constant learning and looking up to people to, oh no, like I'm now an expert in my company. I have things to tell other people and it's a different energy. So that was a big thing I had to learn. Probably every student has to learn, right? Transitioning into the business world.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting transition because investors, a lot of times when you start to raise money, are put out there as authority figures, and it's as though the entrepreneur is there to submit to them or seek wise counsel. But at the same time, the entrepreneur has to be the person who is the expert on their own business, right? How did you handle that duality, especially when you were so young and just getting started?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I feel like probably fundraising ecosystems outside of Silicon Valley are also very different. So I'm in Seattle now. I started in Boston. I actually think it's interesting that in Silicon Valley, probably the best investors don't quite have this hierarchy approach because they've seen so many founders go from, like at the beginning to a really influential, right, impactful owner of the company. So there's a little bit less of that hierarchy probably in SF. In the other markets, like in Boston and in Seattle, definitely feel that hierarchy between VCs and founders. The biggest unlock for me was not to think of the VCs as above me or to think of myself as a founder as above the investor, but to really think of us as equals. Right. They have things to teach me. They have recognition across industries, but I also have a lot to teach them. Right. I am like obsessing over this one area of the world, which for me, when I started was fitness and incentives and behavioral economics. Right. I have so much knowledge and data and I'm doing really cool things that no one has seen before. So finding that equality of relationship, I think really helped me create a good conversation that was interesting and beneficial for everyone.
So, what was the first fundraise like? What was the journey like? Take us through it.
With Gympact, um,
Yeah.
oh man, we launched in January 2012. We went viral because we were an app that charged you for not exercising and paid you if you did exercise. I put together this very clever launch strategy where we were featured simultaneously on the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, and TechCrunch. And we paired up with an influencer in the fitness space and launched this Twitter party. So we went viral. And for 2 weeks, I was basically handling just media inbounds and we were growing like crazy organically. And this was during Techstars, right? So we were like the it app of 2012 in fitness. But like revenue wise, as a consumer mobile app, not anything really impressive. I think halfway through the Techstars program, we took a trip out to Silicon Valley and met with some investors, immediately got a 100K check from an angel, which, I didn't realize you could just talk to someone the next day. They decide to invest 100K, but that's what happens in SF.
It doesn't always go that way.
No, no. Also, it had no, basis for what is normal and not normal. So I also ended up pitching a couple of investors most of whom said no, but then one said yes and gave us a term sheet that was very, very low. I don't remember the exact numbers at the time, but it was a bad term sheet, right? I think it valued us at maybe 3 million or something very low. And we came back to Boston with that bad term sheet, feeling very dejected, my co-founder and I. And we came back, we're like, oh, like we took this trip and, we got this 100K, but then we got this really bad term sheet and, feeling bad about ourselves. And then the founders, the experienced founders, right, in the Techstars program were like, that is amazing. Like you just got a term sheet to lead you around. Like, what you need to do is now, right, don't tell anyone who gave you the term sheet or that it's a bad term sheet. Just use the fact and talk to other investors. And that's what we did. And we ended up then finding a really great investor with a great term sheet, classic, right, fundraising moves that we had no clue how to execute. But we ended up, pitching at Demo Day, Techstars Boston, already fully raised, like funded, great terms and lead investor. Yeah, that was my first fundraise ever.
Awesome. You went from really just kind of brand new in the world of entrepreneurship so quickly to picking up tips and expertise. What did you learn in that fundraise that has kind of become part of your permanent handbook?
Yeah, there's pros and cons to this, but I have never done anything different. I went from, an undergrad studying economics to running my first company and then my second company. So for better or worse, I had no bad habits. I also had no good habits. So when it came to fundraising, I was just like a sponge, right? You have to kind of be a constant student. I feel like every fundraise is a learning process, right? Hopefully it's fast, but even if it's fast, every pitch is a chance for you to get feedback and to know what works. So it's an interesting opportunity to immediately take in that feedback and improve with every pitch.
Yeah, that continuous learning is one of the top themes as I'm meeting with outstanding fundraisers, that they really look at every meeting as an opportunity, not just to close or advance a conversation, but really to say, hey, let me figure out what works and what doesn't. How do you do that? Do you ask for feedback from investors? What are your ways of continuous improvement?
That is a great question. So the first coffee meeting typically I take alone. I think it's really just, that intuitive connection, right? Of like saying your part, but also really taking the time to listen, ask questions, make it a dialogue. And the thing that works for me is for the second meeting, for the deck pitch, typically I always have my co-founder there. And my co-founder can really help to watch what I do, what resonates. Because sometimes when you're in sales, right, like pitch mode, it's really hard for me to be both pitching and taking in feedback. It's nice to have a second person in the room just observing.
Yeah, and that's a tactical question for a lot of people is it better or worse to bring a second executive with them to a meeting? It's really interesting. So your perspective is that one of the benefits of doing that is that you get a second set of eyes and ears on the conversation.
Absolutely. Yes. And I almost never do that for the first coffee meeting because the first one is really about the CEO, right? The CEO and your lead investor. Ideally, this is the partner that you're going to be working with at the fund, right? Creating that connection first and foremost. But once you have that connection, then I think it's great to have a second pair of eyes. And also, I love my co-founders. They're really smart. They know a lot. So, I want them in the room as well.
Awesome. So what did you learn from Gympact and the capital journey you had there that really changed your approach going forward, like when you started Loftium?
Yeah, my biggest thing is so we raised like a smaller, like 850K round. That was the round that we raised right before Demo Day at Techstars. We actually hit profitability without spending much of that money. We went from launch in January to profitable by December in 2012 because we actually had a
Amazing.
financial model embedded. We're an incentives app. And we also didn't know that that was a special thing. We're just like, oh, look, our bank account's growing instead of going down every month. And then our investors were like, wow, like that's really fast to get there. It was a small team too. It was like a team of, I think, 6 at the time. My second round of capital, that was where I really learned the pros and cons, I think, of taking VC capital. So we were profitable, we were growing. We went out and talked to some investors and ended up getting interest from Khosla Ventures. So The issue was, I think, our consumer app with its financial incentives. I think there was a peak, right? There's a cap to the growth. Not everyone wants to be charged for not exercising, it turns out. There's a certain group and they really love it. But, to be honest, it should have been more of a lifestyle company. And I think the experienced VC saw that. But we were able to work with Keith Raboy when he was at Kusla the first time, and he spotted an opportunity where we could expand beyond this like fun consumer app into a health insurance product. During that time, Obamacare was getting rolled out. There was like some consumer right, insurance type themes. Truthfully, that should have been a different company, like not the same fun consumer mobile app. And that other company definitely should not have been run by 23-year-olds. It took some experience. There's a lot of legal challenges. We didn't know any of these things. We did at least sit down to think about that decision.
What was the thinking? What pushed you into it? And I imagine there's a certain tyranny of the venture capital model that kind of forces you to think in certain ways. How did that tyranny of the VC model kind of bring you into the track of making that decision?
Oh, that was where we learned about the tyranny of the VC model. I remember sitting down, right, and thinking through, okay, we can continue as a profitable, probably like lifestyle, right, consumer app that was, like had its impact in the industry, or we can really bet big, go after this pretty crazy health insurance, smart deductible play, jump into the unknown, but have the ability to build something really huge. In hindsight, I would have chosen the first lifestyle company and maybe done this as a
No.
separate company. Didn't know that, right? The pros and cons of being 23. So I think we were honestly just attracted to being able to work with people like Keith, like Max Loftium invested in the round as well. Personally, it has benefited me, but from a business perspective, I always give our founders this advice. Like if you're not a venture-backed company, do not take VC funding because you can't get off. Like once you make that decision, that's it, right? You have to see it through.
Yeah. Yeah, and VC always prefers an outsized outcome, right?
Yes.
Like the idea of settling for a smaller outcome is never really part of the VC equation. And an entrepreneur who walks in and thinks medium size is one that a VC says, something's missing typically,
Yep,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. And certain funds more than others too, right? Coastal Ventures absolutely is you have to be shooting massive to be that type of bet for them. Other funds, right? Like our incubator, AI2 incubator, we're so early that I think we're more founder aligned in terms of, whatever size outcome the founder wants to take. But once you step over like C, definitely A, right? And B, you can't step off.
Yeah, totally. So jumping forward to Loftium, a lot of times fundraising isn't just like a milestone or a transaction or a relationship. It's like the difference between the company really making it and potentially having to go under. So I kind of wanted to dive in with you into some of those make or break moments where the stakes were really high and the future of your startup just depended on getting the funding round done. And we talked a little bit about COVID and the timing of Loftium's Series B. Could we dive into that?
Sure. Yep. It's one of these unbelievable stories that I can't believe we survived. So
Yeah. Yeah. So the world changed fast in COVID. Where were you and what did you do?
yeah, Loftium was an affordable housing startup, right? We had real estate, we had travel, right? We combined actually two revenue streams into one single family home, which is long-term rental and short-term rental. Right before COVID, we had raised our Series A. We had raised a 15 million Series A January of 2019. We had grown tremendously, expanded from 3 markets to 10 markets. We were adding about like almost 100 homes per month. We had hit about 30 million of revenue. We were feeling really good heading into our Series B, which we were starting the process in March 2020. And I was talking to my co-founder, Adam. I was like, Adam, I think we are actually finally too big to die. Like, famous last words. Because things were just humming, right? We had a team of 50 some people at the time. Like it really felt good. Like I could step away for a whole month and fundraise and things were just running without me. I start the fundraise meetings and they're really positive, right? Like I'm running my standard process, coffee meetings are going well, they're converting well into the second meetings. By the second week, I was being scheduled for partner meetings already. So feeling really good about our Series B. And then that week, right, of March when the WHO announced the pandemic, right, like everything shut down, Airbnb basically forced us to refund all of the trips, like made an executive decision that like no one was going to be able to stay in any Airbnbs. We lost 90% of our short-term revenue within 4 days. And we, entered into the Series B fundraise with 6 months of runway, right? Comfortable range, but that depended a lot on our revenue because we had significant revenue at the time to feed a team of 50. Without the short-term rental revenue, suddenly our homes went from profitable to not profitable to being a drain on our resources. So our 6 months of runway shrunk to 1 month. So within 1 week, I went from partner meetings, right, like increasing our projections because we're feeling really confident to break the glass moment, like redo financial projections completely. We had to lay off half the team based on those projections. We had to take a bunch of emergency measures, right? Scrap the Series B, had to go back to just, like customers. We had people in homes, we had guests in our units. Loftium eventually hosted over 150,000 guests between all of our units. So like we had like thousands of people looking to us for answers about the pandemic that no one had answers to. It was a very, very intense time for us.
So you retrenched, changed the business. How did you know when it was time to go back for capital and whether you'd be able to earn it or not under a totally new set of conditions?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, honestly, we probably had a 95% chance of dying in that moment. We had to basically execute perfectly to make it through that time period and then have some luck on our side. So, things that we did, we had to rebuild the revenue from travel, short term rental to medium term stays, right? Emergency workers, travel nurses, like really like redo that side of things. We had to really communicate well with our landlords and renters, like everyone on the team who was not laid off. I actually had a one-on-one conversation before doing the layoffs and told them this is going to be a really hard period. If you're not interested in doing that, I completely understand, but let me know now because I'm being honest about what this is going to look like. So as a team, we had this crazy system where every day for a couple of months, we had twice a day all hands. Like in the morning before we started work, I led the all hands 30 minutes, everyone was there. And then at the end of the day, we had another all hands because things were changing so rapidly. But through a lot of these, like all hands on deck, right? like type of moments, I think by the end of 2020, we had turned all of our properties around to being profitable, renegotiated a lot of contracts, rebuilt up the revenue. And we had some, luck items, right? Exogenous factors that I had told our investors, like we need three things to go right in order for us to raise. We need, we need the COVID vaccines to be effective, right? At least 70% effective they were. We needed, this is where it might get political, we needed Biden to win over Trump because we need someone competent to deploy said vaccines. And we need the Airbnb IPO to go really well. That December 2020 IPO went well. All three of these things went well. And that's how we knew, right? Like the markets, outside factors were positive. We had turned our business around. We felt confident about the next raise. But I guess like one more lesson learned there, right? That no VC cares about how you've gotten through the struggle, right? Like it's impressive, right? It shows grit, it shows ingenuity, but honestly, that's not enough for a fundraise. Like they don't want to hear about your struggles. VCs want to hear about where things are easy. Like what have you learned? Like what's the
Yes.
spark that now makes you right fundable past this very traumatic period? And for us, like what we learned was that, previous to COVID, we had kind of an inefficient system where we had to find our properties first, then find the renters. Through COVID, we did not have that luxury. So we actually created a system where the renters would find the properties for us, and then we go and sign the property. And that unlock created what eventually became the host to own product, where our renters could actually find the home. We would purchase the home for them, and then they would have a path to home ownership. And that came out through COVID and was the seed of that spark, right? The excitement that got us through the next round.
Yeah, so you changed your business model, not only because the outside world changed, but did the business model you changed to end up being a better fit for capital for the long term, do you think?
I think think so. Well, we had always had this vision of where Loftium could go, right? We started actually as a down payment product and started in home ownership. The down payment was not the right product iteration, I guess. But even through our rental process, we always had this eye towards homeownership. COVID just forced us to make that change faster because of efficiency. And right, like we saw the opportunity because of the interest rate environment, we're able to access capital, right? Housing affordability became a major talking point. Single family homes before COVID was actually this weird type of rental category that most people didn't believe in, right? Multifamily was the hot thing in the real estate investment world, and it flipped. So there were tailwinds, right? We had a bunch of headwinds, namely like losing our revenue and travel stopping with a global pandemic,
Yeah.
but we have tailwinds also, around single family homes, affordability, interest rates, capital, interest. And also, I think travel came back much faster than anyone expected. We had this, I guess, like team kind of like a dark like bet around when travel would get back up to 60% of normal, because that's when we would flip and be profitable again. And it turned out that it happened right before Labor Day in 2020, even with COVID still raging. But that happened, especially in the short-term rental space where we had, separate entrances, no contact hosting. So yeah, like the tailwinds are also
Yeah.
there.
One of the things you were saying is that investors don't give you credit for all the things that you've been through. I recently had a conversation with an entrepreneur who was talking about wanting to raise money from insiders. And he's like, well, before the round, we were here and now we're there. How can they not want to invest? And the answer, of course, is investors aren't backward looking about saying, well, how much progress did you make and what have you been through and how hard was it? You recognize that, it sounds like, intuitively.
No, my investor, my seed investor had to sit me aside and tell that to me outright because I didn't get it. Like, because I was deep in the trenches. Like I was personally so impressed by what our team was able to pull off, right? And like everyone on the outside was very impressed by it. And I think you get some credit, right? Like execution ability, grit. It's just not enough. It's not enough to spark another round of capital.
What instead do you have to do? If it's telling them how far I've come and look what I've been through and all the adversity doesn't do it, what do you think is the thing that turns a no into a yes?
Well, I think all of that needs to be like one sentence, so you can't get too deep into the adversity. No one likes adversity. I think it's really about what the adversity has taught you. Like, what did you not know before that you learned, and what's the vision for where that takes you now?
So when you went back out for capital again, how hot was the temperature and how warm or cold was the reception?
From a general VC perspective, this is 2021. So the general VC environment was extremely hot. The proptech travel space was still not hot at all, right? So we had the
Yeah.
benefit of the general market FOMO, but like for us, it was nothing like our Series A, which we signed term sheets in less than 30 days. We went out, even with everything we learned, even with like proving survival through adversity and the tailwinds. We went through and talked with a bunch of different investors, or I did, I guess, via Zoom in January 21. And people were intrigued, like they were interested, but I think there was like too much fear because there was still so much uncertainty, especially in the travel space at that time. So what ended up happening is that our existing investors stepped up with a term sheet. It was a flat round. We had a new investor then, get excited enough to jump in, to join. And then that actually ended up triggering our round to be oversubscribed because all the people on the sidelines weren't sure, but the insiders knew exactly what the business looked like and were excited enough to jump in.
So that's multiple times now that kind of having one person make a move first with a term sheet or stepping forward kind of catalyzes things. How does that translate into what you advise other people now?
Yeah. So, I tell our founders valuation, especially in the early stages, is really just dependent on competition, right? So your goal is to try to drive as many term sheets as possible, as fast as possible, ideally all in the same timeline. Um, and I also tend to think of investors differently. Like some investors are really fast, right? And they like get to conviction and they make decisions on their own. There's also like people that are very FOMO driven, and also people who are slower but maybe more thoughtful. But if you just have those folks, like they may never get to a decision. So we try to craft each batch of investors thoughtfully around like who's going to be the fast people that drive the process, right? Who get everyone on the same pace so that, like ideally your dream team comes together from an investor perspective.
And now, as you're working with multiple entrepreneurs across multiple companies that they add to, do you actually kind of have in your database, I know this investor tends to move fast, this one tends to move slow, and that becomes part of your selection?
Yeah, I wish it were a cleaner database, but yeah, I have a list of investors. Well, I came into AI2 with my own contacts of investors. I actually went through and realized I personally had over 200 VCs that I had pitched as a CEO of two different companies. And then AI2 itself has like a large database of, investors that all of our founders have talked to. I have notes in terms of every investor's thesis. I do coffee meetings to stay up to date on people's preferences because they change, and VCs, especially right now, are moving around funds. Yeah, I have notes around, what type of investor they are. The goal is not just to get a term sheet. The goal is ideally, right, to get the best investor that's a good fit for your company for this stage and can really help you grow.
Yeah, and I advise entrepreneurs find a couple of navigators to have around you who have that database and actually deliberately think of investors and categorize them and group them and know, okay, who has what style and what motion. It is so valuable to have somebody like you advising an entrepreneur.
And I had, all of these folks around me when I was a founder. So it's very rewarding for me personally to be able to give back to founders in this way. I think I'm very lucky to have a job where this very niche skill set that I have is very highly valued.
Yeah, that's great. And maintaining that database is a lot of work too. You got to really keep your notes and be debriefing with entrepreneurs to say, okay, what happened? What were they
Yeah.
like? Not just your own experience, but learning from other people's experience too.
Yes, definitely. I think the best VCs do this for founders, right? Where it's not just work to me. I'm actually curious. Like I'm really curious to decode. Sometimes I feel like the VC language, right, is like a second language, and some people are fluent and some people are still learning it. So I like to see what VCs actually wrote back, what type of questions are being asked. Sometimes there's like back channel calls just to like get the real answer of like what happened in this meeting. I think founders really appreciate that because often, I had this as a young first-time founder from a meeting. You're like, that was great. And it's like, never pay attention to the things that people say, right? You have to look at their actions. You have to look at like where they dig into afterwards.
Yeah, one of my best mentors said, ignore all the happy talk and just measure how long does it take them between one action and the
Yep.
next. And the time gap is one of your top indicators of how interested they really
Yep,
are.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. You've kind of gone from not knowing anything to now you're advising other entrepreneurs on kind of all the best practices for fundraising. You're known as an exceptional fundraiser. What do you think makes you such an exceptional fundraiser?
Like, truthfully, I have not always thought of myself as an exceptional fundraiser. I realized that, especially in Seattle, I'm an extremely aggressive fundraiser. Like, I don't think of myself as an aggressive person, but my philosophy towards fundraising is that you should try to find the best investor possible as quickly as possible because you have to get back to building your company, right? And like the longer you spend with VCs, like that's time away. That's a trade-off. I don't feel bad, I guess, that I'm not a relationship fundraiser. I also don't feel bad about playing the game of fundraising, right? Because the VCs are playing this game as well. Like we're all playing this game, right? And I think a lot of first-time founders feel bad about negotiating, about chasing a term sheet when maybe they don't always want this particular term sheet. And yeah, for me, I think it's really just keeping the North Star as, what is your role as a CEO? Like you have to bring in resources, you have to bring in ideally great, like board members, right? And like if you need to play the game to do it, right, you have to learn how to play the game, trying to change that game sometimes is at the detriment of your own company.
Yeah, and so you leaned into that. And so when you give advice to entrepreneurs, what do you say to keep that speed high? Is it about volume, or what are your big cues that you give people to kind of get them in that mindset?
Yeah, I tend to advise my companies to do month-long batches or sprints and to keep it very contained. So this is my personal style. People have different philosophies on this. I don't tend to do like 100 investors all at once. You're just like back-to-back 30-minute Zoom calls all the time. That's not my style. I tend to tranche it into like, batch one, batch two, batch three. And in each batch, you kind of have a mixture of investors, including ones that you really, really want as part of your round. And I tend to keep a very tight timeline around like week one, coffee meetings, week two, diligence, week three, ideally, is like partner meetings and term sheets. And then if nothing works out, then you start on batch two the second month. And that way you're always,
Yeah.
clean, or like day zero, right? You're starting over, you're fresh, you're focused, and it's not so overwhelming that you're like not remembering your last conversation, or you're just like a robot repeating the same lines, because VCs can tell like, if you're not genuinely like with that the right energy.
Right. What do you think is some of the best advice that you ever received as an entrepreneur that you now pass along to others?
Ooh, great question. Just generally, as an entrepreneur outside of fundraising, a concept that I heard about is I call it single point of failure. And I heard this from the COO of Rover, Brent. We had coffee one time. This is when my company was growing rapidly, and it was getting harder for me to manage like how big the team was getting and hiring and processes. And I was like, how do you manage to keep the spirit, right? And the speed, even as, the company gets to be thousands of people. And his answer was that, no matter how large a team gets, each individual still is a single point of failure for something, right? And it's counterintuitive. You think that larger companies would have more like coverage, but like having that ownership, even if your scope gets smaller and smaller as the company gets bigger, right? It creates motivation, it creates ownership, right? It allows the best people to shine, and it adds a little bit of tension, right? It's like, oh, like you truly own something. It's not just like you're a cog and you don't matter, right? So that's something that I bring out to our founders. I definitely talked about all the time at Loftium. SPF was like the acronym that's like all over our Slack. Like, who's SPF for this? So I like that it's called single point of failure. Like people ask, why failure? Why not like single point of like ownership or something positive? I don't tend to think about failure as a bad thing. Like I think like as a founder, you can't think that failure is a bad thing. Failure just means that you learn something, right? I like having failure constantly being talked about so that it's not uncomfortable, it's not unfamiliar, and that way people are willing to take more risks and raise, right, areas of failure so that we can all learn from it.
That's a pretty fierce attitude, right? Because it's both empowering, but it's also a lot of responsibility. When it comes to the fundraise process, some entrepreneurs, when they see signs that an investor is not super interested, they say, well, I better not pursue them. Some are fighters. Some try to convert no's into yeses. Some of them instead say, oh, there's a lot of fish in the sea. How hard should you work trying to convince somebody, and how hard should you fight to get that best investor over the finish line?
Yeah, you're asking such great questions. That's making me reflect. I don't personally think it's possible to convert a pure no into a yes, right? Like if the investor has gotten to a no, I tell founders, don't try to convince them. It's honestly kind of like embarrassing and annoying to the investor once they've already gotten to the no. I do think if an investor is on the fence, you can do quite a lot to try to convince them, especially if they're an investor that you really want to work with. I think it's worthwhile. And that really just comes down to understanding, right, where are the areas of hesitancy, like really thinking deeply, like, hey, like, can I actually answer those questions, right? Do I feel confident about these answers? Like, do I think that they're wrong in terms of that perspective? Yeah. So I think on the fence, yes, you can definitely convert people. And I've seen that. And also like now as an investor, I have changed my mind, right? I'm like open-minded. Sometimes like a founder follows up with me with something that surprises me, and that's great. And I should say the founder should know if the VC enthusiasm is obvious to the founder, like your enthusiasm for the VC is also pretty obvious. Some people are very good at
Yeah.
faking it, but usually it's pretty apparent if there's a good fit or not.
Yeah. So, on that note, as you work with entrepreneurs, what have you learned about managing your psychology through the process? What have you found works to be able to manage your attitude and help people to correct it when it gets out of whack?
Yeah. I mean, as a CEO, you're a single point of failure for capital injections into your company. That's a pretty big, thing to not fail at. I think for me, in the fundraising process, because you have to bring so much energy to every VC meeting, I needed space for me to just kind of like collapse. Like, when I was fundraising, right, I had investors like with offices nearby, and I would just like go in and just be a shell of a person. I can't talk to people. I just need to like be in that mood and get it all out of my system so that I can go back into the like, energetic fundraising mood. That's why I don't do 100 VCs that I'm pitching simultaneously. Like I just don't think I can keep up that type of energy. I want it to be genuine, right? Like I'm a very genuine fundraiser. If I believe in my company, I can convince people to believe in it too. And I'm like the toughest critic of all the risks around my company. So, I need to have proven that to myself before I can go out and talk about it to other people. I think, that the breaks for me really allow me to show up with that type of like genuine confidence, clear headedness. So for me, that's very important. And I try to create that space for our founders here too. With fundraising, like you do have to put on this show, right? You can't have an off day when you're fundraising. So I try to create space for them to come and like talk to me about their worries. They can remove all the veneer, right? And come and just like talk to me about their fears, talk to each other about their fears. We typically have founders that are fundraising at the same time, so they have buddies. Even in the hottest processes, like it is really hard. You're still getting no's, you're getting your hopes up and crushed, and you just need to know that this is normal.
You're a really highly appreciated advisor to so many entrepreneurs as a real expert in this. How important of a skill is it to be an effective fundraiser?
I would say it is the number one skill once every 18 to 24 months. So you have to have this skill, right, for the good of your company, but it's only one skill. I think it's just as important to be a really great CEO in other ways, right? Like recruiting talent, right? Managing people, setting the North Star, seeing strategy. There's many other important skills to being a CEO. The ideal, I think, is that you are running such a great business that you don't have to be the best fundraiser and you're able to show off just a great machine that you built in your startup. I would rather have that uh, mixture.
How often do you get that fact set versus having to work pretty hard at it, though?
Depends on the timing. I think we're very lucky in that we're early stage AI investors. So there's a lot of grace given to founders, especially our very technical founders, right? That like this is totally
Yeah.
new for them. I think it's an important thing to learn. And the founders that dismiss it, right, I think often don't get very far because it's not always up and to the right. Like you will run into difficult times, and those are the times that the really good fundraisers really show up. Like the difference is massive. And I see a lot of founders that have only previously lived through the good times, like raised in 2021, basically. And they're like, oh, fundraising's so easy. And like, I do agree, right? If you're in the right place at the right time, it is extremely easy to get money. But then, ideally, if your company grows large enough, you are going to face challenges. And, this is a skill just like any other that if you have it, you'll get through those times.
You're amazing and have already helped so many entrepreneurs. So appreciate you doing this with me and having this conversation to help a whole lot more. Thank you so
This was
much.
really fun. Thank you for having me, Ben.
Wow, what a great conversation. Yifan took us from her first fundraise right out of college all the way to becoming a top fundraiser. Throughout her journey, Yifan sought out great mentors and asked the right questions. That guidance, mixed with some high stakes, Do or die moments transformed her into the excellent leader she is today. And now she's helping the next generation of founders become great leaders and fundraisers themselves. For startup founders, fundraising too often feels like a mystery, but stories like Yifan's can help give you an edge. I'd love to hear in the comments what you think of her advice and what challenges you face. And hey, if you liked what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for joining me on Razor's Edge. I'm Ben Elowitz. See you next time.